Picture this. It's a warm June evening in 1994. America is basking in the afterglow of the World Cup. The economy is booming, and the nation feels invincible. Then, in the span of a few brutal minutes on a quiet Brentwood street, everything changes. Two lives are savagely cut short, and the man accused of their murder isn't some unknown criminal lurking in the shadows. He's one of America's most beloved sports heroes, Orenthal James. O.J. Simpson wasn't just famous. He was iconic. The man who had once gracefully leaped through airports in Hertz commercials, who had shattered NFL records and charmed his way into Hollywood, suddenly found himself at the center of what would become the most watched, most controversial, and most racially divisive criminal trial in American history. This is the story of how a double murder transformed from a local crime into a national obsession that would forever change how America viewed race, celebrity, justice, and the media. The O.J. Simpson case wasn't just a trial. It was a mirror held up to American society, reflecting deep-seated tensions about race, class, and privilege that the nation had been trying to ignore. For 11 months, America would be glued to their television sets, watching as the prosecution and defense battled not just over evidence and testimony, but over competing narratives of what America truly was. By the time the verdict was read on October 3, 1995, the nation would be forever changed, divided along racial lines in a way that seemed impossible just a year earlier. The Golden Boy, O.J. Simpson's rise to fame. To understand the magnitude of O.J. Simpson's fall from grace, one must first appreciate the heights from which he tumbled. Born in San Francisco's housing projects in 1947, Simpson's early life was marked by poverty and struggle. His father abandoned the family when O.J. was young, leaving his mother to raise 4 children alone. Young Orenthal suffered from rickets, a condition that left him bow-legged and requiring leg braces until he was 5 years old. It was an inauspicious beginning for someone who would become one of the greatest running backs in football history. Simpson's transformation from a struggling child in the projects to a national icon began at Galileo High School in San Francisco, where his athletic prowess first became apparent. His speed and agility on the football field were remarkable, but it was at the University of Southern California where he truly became a legend. At USC, Simpson didn't just play football, he dominated it. In 1968, he became the first player to rush for over 2,000 yards in a season, a feat that earned him the Heisman Trophy and cemented his status as college football royalty. The transition to professional football seemed seamless. Drafted first overall by the Buffalo Bills in 1969, Simpson initially struggled to find his footing in the NFL. The Bills were a struggling franchise, and Simpson's early years were marked by frustration and modest statistics. However, everything changed in 1972 when the Bills hired Lou Saban as head coach and built their entire offensive strategy around Simpson's unique talents. What followed was nothing short of magical. In 1973, Simpson became the first NFL player to rush for over 2,000 yards in a single season, accomplishing this feat in just 14 games, a record that would stand for decades. His combination of speed, vision, and power was unlike anything the NFL had ever seen. He wasn't just breaking records, he was redefining what was possible for a running back. Fans didn't just watch Simpson play, they marveled at him, the way one might watch a master artist create a painting. But Simpson's ambitions extended far beyond the football field. Even during his playing career, he was cultivating an image that transcended sports. He was charming, articulate, and possessed a smile that could light up a room. Madison Avenue took notice. The Hertz rental car company signed him to a groundbreaking advertising campaign that featured Simpson sprinting through airports, leaping over luggage and barriers with the same grace he displayed on the football field. The tagline, "Go O.J. Go," became part of the American lexicon. These commercials did more than sell rental cars. They made Simpson one of the first black athletes to achieve true crossover appeal in corporate America. At a time when racial tensions still ran high and opportunities for black entertainers and athletes in mainstream advertising were limited, Simpson broke through barriers with seemingly effortless charm. He wasn't marketed as a black athlete. He was simply OJ, likable, non-threatening, and quintessentially American. Hollywood came calling next. Simpson parlayed his fame into a successful acting career, starring in popular films like The Towering Inferno, and later finding great success in the Naked Gun comedy series. His performances were typically lighthearted and played to his strengths as a naturally charismatic personality. He wasn't winning Academy Awards, but he was winning hearts and proving that his appeal extended far beyond the sports world. By the early 1990s, O.J. Simpson had achieved something rare in American culture. He had become beloved by virtually everyone. Black Americans admired him as a successful athlete who had broken barriers and achieved unprecedented crossover success. White Americans embraced him as an entertainer who seemed to embody the American dream, someone who had risen from humble beginnings through hard work and natural talent. He was wealthy, famous, and seemingly living the perfect life. Simpson's personal life appeared to match his public success. His marriage to Nicole Brown, a stunning blonde waitress he had met while still married to his first wife, seemed like something out of a Hollywood script. Nicole was beautiful, vivacious, and perfectly complemented Simpson's larger-than-life personality. They lived in a magnificent Brentwood mansion, drove luxury cars, and moved in circles that included celebrities, athletes, and the social elite of Los Angeles. To the outside world, O.J. Simpson had it all. He was the ultimate American success story, a man who had overcome adversity, achieved greatness in multiple fields, and seemed to effortlessly navigate between different worlds. He was the athlete who became an actor, the black man who was embraced by white America, the poor kid who became rich and famous. In many ways, he represented the promise of America itself, that with talent, charisma, and determination, anyone could achieve anything. This golden image would make what happened next all the more shocking and devastating. The night that changed everything. June 12, 1994. The evening of June 12, 1994, began like countless others in the affluent Brentwood neighborhood of Los Angeles. The sun was setting over the Pacific Ocean, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured streets lined with expensive homes and luxury cars. Nicole Brown Simpson was spending a quiet evening at home with her two young children, Sydney and Justin, in the condominium at 875 South Bundy Drive that she had moved into after her divorce from O.J. Simpson was finalized earlier that year. The day had been typical for Nicole, a mixture of domestic responsibilities and social activities that filled the lives of many divorced mothers in upscale Los Angeles. She had attended her daughter Sydney's dance recital that afternoon, where O.J. had also been present. Those who witnessed their interaction would later describe it as cordial, but strained, the kind of polite distance that often exists between divorced couples trying to co-parent successfully while managing their own complicated emotions. That evening, Nicole decided to have dinner with her family at Mezzaluna, a trendy Italian restaurant in nearby Brentwood. It was the kind of establishment that catered to the affluent residents of the area, celebrities, business executives, and socialites who appreciated good food in an atmosphere where they could dine without being disturbed. Nicole was a regular customer, known and liked by the staff. During dinner, Nicole's mother accidentally dropped her eyeglasses. It was a small, seemingly insignificant incident that would soon take on enormous importance. A waiter named Ronald Goldman, a 25-year-old aspiring actor and model who worked at Mezzaluna to support himself while pursuing his dreams in Hollywood, offered to return the glasses to Nicole later that evening after his shift ended. Ronald Goldman represented the hopes and dreams of countless young people who flocked to Los Angeles each year. Handsome, athletic, and ambitious, he had moved to California from Chicago with dreams of making it in the entertainment industry. He was taking acting classes, working out religiously to maintain his physique, and networking with anyone who might help advance his career. Working at Mezzaluna wasn't his dream job, but it paid the bills and occasionally allowed him to meet influential people in the entertainment industry. Goldman was known for his friendliness and professionalism. Customers liked him, and he was building a reputation as someone who could be trusted with discretionary tasks, like returning eyeglasses to a regular customer's home. It was the kind of small favor that good waiters do for valued customers, the type of personal service that keeps people coming back to high-end establishments. As the evening progressed and Mezzaluna began winding down for the night, Goldman prepared to make the short drive to Nicole's condominium. It should have been a simple errand: drive over, drop off the glasses, exchange a few pleasant words, and head home. Instead, he was walking into a situation that would cost him his life and forever change American history. What happened next in the narrow walkway leading to Nicole's front door has been the subject of countless investigations, expert analyses, and courtroom arguments, yet many details remain shrouded in mystery. What is known with certainty is that sometime between 10 o'clock and 10:30 p.m., both Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman were brutally murdered in an attack so savage and frenzied that it shocked even experienced homicide investigators. Nicole was found at the bottom of the steps leading to her condominium's entrance, lying in a pool of blood. Her throat had been slashed so deeply that she was nearly decapitated. The coroner would later determine that the wound was so severe it had cut through tissue, muscle, and cartilage, leaving her head connected to her body by just a small portion of skin. She had also suffered multiple stab wounds to her neck and scalp, indicating a prolonged and vicious assault. Ronald Goldman's body was discovered nearby, slumped against a fence in what appeared to be a defensive position. Unlike Nicole, Goldman had clearly fought for his life. His hands and arms bore numerous defensive wounds, cuts and slashes that occurred as he tried to protect himself from the attack. He had been stabbed multiple times in the chest, abdomen, and thigh. The pattern of wounds suggested a struggle that lasted several minutes, with Goldman valiantly trying to defend both himself and possibly Nicole before succumbing to his injuries. The crime scene was a tableau of horror that would be forever seared into the memories of the first responders who discovered it. Blood was everywhere, on the walkway, the steps, the fence, and the surrounding vegetation. The violence had been so extreme that blood spatter extended several feet in multiple directions. Mixed with the blood was evidence of a fierce struggle. Goldman's shirt was torn, his beeper had been knocked from his belt, and a knit cap and a single leather glove were found nearby. The brutality of the murders was shocking even by Los Angeles standards, a city that had seen its share of violent crime. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong or a random act of violence by someone under the influence of drugs. This was personal, passionate, and filled with rage. The killer had continued attacking long after both victims were mortally wounded, suggesting a level of fury that went beyond simple intent to kill. When the first police officers arrived at the scene in the early morning hours of June 13th, they immediately recognized that this was no ordinary murder case. The level of violence, the high-profile neighborhood, and the identity of one of the victims guaranteed that this case would receive intense scrutiny from both the media and the public. What none of them could have predicted was that this crime scene investigation would soon become one of the most scrutinized and controversial in American legal history. As dawn broke over Brentwood on June 13, 1994, the perfect life that O.J. Simpson had built was about to come crashing down. The Golden Boy was about to become the prime suspect in one of the most brutal double murders in Los Angeles history, setting in motion a chain of events that would captivate and divide America like nothing before or since the investigation begins. Following the trail of evidence. As the sun rose over the affluent streets of Brentwood on June 13, 1994, the Los Angeles Police Department found themselves at the center of what would become one of the most scrutinized criminal investigations in American history. The discovery of Nicole Brown Simpson's and Ronald Goldman's bodies had already sent shockwaves through the community, but what investigators didn't yet realize was that their every move, every decision, and every piece of evidence they collected would soon be dissected by millions of Americans and analyzed by some of the most skilled defense attorneys in the country. Detective Mark Fuhrman was among the first investigators to arrive at the Bundy Drive crime scene. A veteran officer with the LAPD's West Los Angeles division, Fuhrman had seen his share of violent crimes, but even he was struck by the brutality of what lay before him. As he carefully examined the scene, noting the positions of the bodies, the blood spatter patterns, and the various pieces of evidence scattered around the narrow walkway, he began to form theories about what might have happened and who might have been responsible. The evidence seemed to tell a clear story. This wasn't a random crime or a burglary gone wrong. The personal nature of the violence, particularly the savage attack on Nicole, suggested someone who knew the victims and had strong emotional motivations. The location, Nicole's private residence, indicated that the killer either lived nearby or was familiar with her routines and living situation. Most significantly, the extreme brutality of the attack suggested the kind of rage that often characterizes domestic violence situations. Fuhrman's attention quickly turned to O.J. Simpson. As Nicole's ex-husband and the father of her children, Simpson would naturally be a person of interest in any investigation of her murder. But there were additional factors that made him an even more compelling suspect. Police records showed a history of domestic violence calls to the Simpson residence during O.J. and Nicole's marriage. In 1989, Nicole had called police after O.J. had allegedly beaten her, leaving her with bruises and a split lip. Photos from that incident, which would later become crucial evidence, showed Nicole's battered face and torn clothing. The domestic violence history was particularly significant because it established a pattern of escalating violence that criminal psychologists often see in cases that end in murder. Simpson's controlling behavior and jealous rages had been documented not just by police, but by friends and family members who had witnessed his treatment of Nicole. Some would later testify that they had feared for Nicole's safety and had worried that O.J.'s obsession with his ex-wife might eventually turn deadly. As investigators began to piece together the timeline of events leading up to the murders, Simpson's whereabouts on the evening of June 12th became a critical focus. According to his own statements, Simpson had been at his Rockingham Avenue home, just a few miles from Nicole's condominium, during the time when the murders occurred. He claimed to have been alone, preparing for a trip to Chicago where he was scheduled to attend a business meeting. This alibi, or lack thereof, would become a central issue in the case. The physical evidence began to paint an even more damning picture. At the Bundy crime scene, investigators discovered a trail of blood drops leading away from the bodies. The drops appeared to be from someone who had been injured during the attack and was bleeding as they left the scene. Even more significantly, the blood drops seemed to lead in the direction of where a vehicle might have been parked, suggesting that the killer had driven away from the scene. When investigators arrived at Simpson's Rockingham home later that morning to notify him of his ex-wife's death, they discovered what appeared to be additional pieces of crucial evidence. There were blood drops on the driveway leading to Simpson's front door, drops that seemed to match the pattern found at the Bundy scene. Inside Simpson's white Ford Bronco, which was parked outside his home, investigators found more blood evidence on the interior door handle and other surfaces. Perhaps most significantly, investigators discovered a single leather glove behind the guest house on Simpson's property. The glove appeared to match the one found at the Bundy crime scene, and both gloves seemed to be expensive, designer items that were relatively rare. Blood evidence on the Rockingham glove appeared to contain DNA from both victims as well as Simpson himself, creating what prosecutors would later describe as a trail of blood connecting Simpson directly to the murders. The glove discovery was made by Detective Fuhrman, who had obtained permission from Simpson's house guest, Kato Kalin, to search the property after Kalin mentioned hearing loud thumping noises outside his room around the time the murders were believed to have occurred. This discovery would later become one of the most controversial aspects of the entire investigation. with defense attorneys alleging that Foreman had planted the evidence to frame Simpson. As the investigation progressed, additional evidence continued to point toward Simpson's guilt. Hair fibers found on the knit cap at the crime scene were consistent with Simpson's hair samples. Carpet fibers from Simpson's Bronco were found on the glove at Rockingham. Most damning of all, DNA analysis of the blood evidence collected from both crime scenes showed matches to Simpson, Nicole, and Goldman. The odds of the blood belonging to someone other than Simpson were calculated to be billions to one. The murder weapon, believed to be a large knife with a 6-inch blade, was never found despite extensive searches of Simpson's property, nearby areas, and potential disposal sites. This became a weakness in the prosecution's case, as they could never definitively prove how Simpson obtained the weapon or what he did with it after the murders. However, investigators noted that Simpson had a history of collecting knives and had recently purchased a similar knife from a cutlery store, though that particular knife was never located. The timeline reconstruction also presented challenges for Simpson's defense. Cell phone records, airline reservations, and witness statements helped investigators piece together Simpson's movements on the evening of June 12th. The evidence suggested that Simpson had a narrow window of opportunity to commit the murders and return home before his scheduled departure for Chicago. While this tight timeline made the murders theoretically possible, it also required precise execution that seemed almost impossibly choreographed. Simpson's behavior immediately after the murders also raised suspicions. When police first contacted him in Chicago to inform him of Nicole's death, they noted that he didn't ask how she had died, when it had happened, or whether his children were safe, questions that would seem natural for an innocent ex-husband to ask. His immediate decision to fly back to Los Angeles, canceling business meetings and expressing little surprise about Nicole's death, struck investigators as unusual. By the time Simpson returned to Los Angeles on June 13th, the evidence had already begun to mount against him. The combination of his history of domestic violence, his lack of a solid alibi, the physical evidence linking him to both crime scenes, and his suspicious behavior had convinced investigators that they were dealing not with a random crime, but with a carefully planned double murder committed by one of America's most famous athletes. What investigators couldn't have predicted was that this seemingly straightforward case would soon become a battleground over issues of race, police competence, and the American justice system itself. The evidence they had collected, which seemed so compelling in those first days of the investigation, would soon be challenged, questioned, and reinterpreted in ways that would transform the O.J. Simpson case from a murder investigation into a national referendum on American society. The Chase. America watches in disbelief. By June 17, 1994, the O.J. Simpson case had already captured the attention of the American public, but nothing could have prepared the nation for the surreal spectacle that was about to unfold. What began as a routine arrest warrant would evolve into one of the most watched live television events in American history, a slow-speed chase that seemed more like a scene from a movie than real life, and a moment that would forever change how America viewed both celebrity and justice. Simpson had been scheduled to turn himself in to police at 11:00 a.m. that Friday morning. His attorney, Robert Shapiro, had negotiated the surrender with prosecutors, and arrangements had been made for Simpson to be processed quietly and with as much dignity as possible given the circumstances. This type of arrangement was not uncommon for high-profile defendants, allowing them to avoid the circus atmosphere that often surrounds celebrity arrests, while still ensuring they appeared in court to face charges. But 11:00 a.m. came and went with no sign of Simpson. Then noon passed, and 1:00 p.m., and still no O.J. police began to worry that something had gone wrong. Had Simpson fled? Was he planning to resist arrest? Had something happened to him? The LAPD issued a bulletin asking for the public's help in locating Simpson, officially making him a fugitive from justice and adding another dramatic chapter to an already extraordinary case. The search for Simpson intensified throughout the afternoon. Police checked his known haunts, contacted associates, and followed up on reported sightings throughout the Los Angeles area. Media outlets, which had already been covering the case extensively, now had an even bigger story. America's most famous suspected murderer was on the run. At approximately 6:45 p.m., the mystery of Simpson's whereabouts was solved in the most public way possible. A white Ford Bronco, driven by Simpson's longtime friend Al Cowlings with OJ as a passenger, was spotted on the 405 freeway heading south toward Orange County. What happened next would become seared into the collective memory of millions of Americans. The Bronco was moving slowly, perhaps 35 miles per hour, followed by a convoy of police cars that stretched for what seemed like miles. The officers weren't attempting a high-speed pursuit or trying to force the vehicle to stop. Instead, they maintained a respectful distance, almost as if they were escorting rather than chasing the white SUV. This wasn't the typical police chase that Americans had grown accustomed to seeing on their television screens. High-speed pursuits that ended in dramatic crashes or violent takedowns. This was different, more surreal, and somehow more tragic. Television stations across the country interrupted their regular programming to broadcast the chase live. What started as routine news coverage quickly became a national obsession, as viewers realized they were witnessing something unprecedented in American culture. Here was one of the country's most beloved celebrities, a man who had been invited into millions of homes through television commercials and movies, now fleeing from police in connection with a brutal double murder. An estimated 95 million Americans watched the chase live, one of the largest television audiences in history. The numbers were staggering. More people watched the Bronco chase than had watched the Super Bowl that year. Schools stopped classes so students could watch. Offices ground to a halt as employees gathered around television sets. Restaurants and bars turned their TVs to news channels as patrons sat transfixed by the unfolding drama. The scene along the freeways was equally surreal. Thousands of people lined the overpasses and shoulders of the highway, many holding signs of support for Simpson. "Go, OJ, go," read some of the signs, echoing the famous Hertz commercial slogan. Others simply said, "We love you, OJ," or "Run." The crowd's reaction revealed the complex emotions that Simpson's case had stirred up. Many people still couldn't believe that their hero was capable of murder, and they were cheering for his escape, as if this were some kind of sporting event, rather than a criminal investigation. Inside the Bronco, the situation was tense and potentially dangerous. Simpson was reportedly holding a gun to his head and threatening suicide, according to phone conversations between Al Cowlings and police negotiators that were happening in real time during the chase. Cowlings was on a cell phone with 911 operators, serving as an intermediary between his distraught friend and the authorities who were trying to convince Simpson to surrender peacefully. The phone conversations, which were later released to the public, revealed a man in profound emotional distress. Simpson wasn't acting like a hardened criminal or someone trying to evade justice for calculated reasons. Instead, he sounded like someone whose entire world had collapsed, someone who couldn't comprehend how his life had gone from the pinnacle of American success to being accused of brutally murdering the mother of his children. The conversations humanized Simpson in a way that the preceding week of media coverage had not, reminding viewers that behind the celebrity persona was a person in crisis. Police negotiators worked frantically to keep Simpson calm and convince him to give up peacefully. They were walking a delicate line. They needed to apprehend a suspected double murderer, but they also wanted to avoid having a suicide or a violent confrontation play out live on television in front of 95 million viewers. The situation required a level of sensitivity and public relations awareness that was unprecedented in law enforcement. As the chase continued for nearly 2 hours, covering approximately 60 miles of Southern California freeways, the national conversation began to shift. This wasn't just about O.J. Simpson anymore. It was about celebrity, race, domestic violence, and the American justice system. The image of the white Bronco moving slowly along the freeway, followed by police cars with their lights flashing, became an instant American icon, as recognizable and significant as other moments that had defined the decade. The chase finally ended at Simpson's Rockingham home, where hundreds of police officers, FBI agents, and SWAT team members had already assembled. The scene outside the mansion was chaos. Media trucks, satellite dishes, helicopters overhead, and crowds of onlookers who had gathered to witness the end of this extraordinary drama. For nearly an hour, Simpson remained in the Bronco in his driveway, continuing to negotiate with police through Cowlings and his attorney. The standoff was finally resolved when Simpson agreed to surrender peacefully. As he emerged from the Bronco and was taken into custody, the crowd of supporters who had gathered outside his home cheered and chanted his name. It was a bizarre ending to a bizarre day. A suspected murderer being cheered like a returning hero, a celebrity being arrested for the most serious crimes imaginable, while fans expressed their continued devotion. The white Bronco chase had profound implications for the case that was about to unfold. For many Americans, particularly in the black community, Simpson's flight didn't look like the actions of a guilty man trying to escape justice. Instead, it looked like the behavior of someone who was overwhelmed by a system that had already presumed his guilt, someone who was responding emotionally rather than rationally to impossible circumstances. The chase had humanized Simpson and generated sympathy in ways that would influence public opinion throughout the trial. For others, particularly white Americans, the chase seemed to confirm Simpson's guilt. Why would an innocent man run from police? Why would someone flee if they had nothing to hide? The chase appeared to be an admission of guilt, the behavior of someone who knew they were caught and was trying to avoid the consequences of their actions. The racial divide in interpreting the chase would prove to be a preview of how the entire trial would be perceived by different segments of American society. What some saw as evidence of guilt, others saw as evidence of persecution. What some interpreted as criminal behavior, others viewed as the understandable response of a black man who didn't trust the justice system. The white Bronco chase had set the stage for what would become not just a criminal trial, but a national conversation about race and justice in America. Conclusion. The verdict that divided America. On October 3, 1995, at exactly 10:07 a.m. Pacific Time, America held its collective breath as the foreman of the jury in the People of California v. Orenthal, James Simpson, stood to deliver the verdict that would conclude the most watched criminal trial in American history. An estimated 150 million people, nearly two-thirds of the American population, stopped what they were doing to watch the moment when justice would finally be served in the case that had obsessed the nation for over a year. We, the jury in the above-entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder, the foreman announced, his words ricocheting across a nation that had been divided not just about Simpson's guilt or innocence, but about fundamental questions of race, justice, and the American legal system itself. The reactions were immediate, visceral, and starkly divided along racial lines. In predominantly black communities across America, the verdict was met with cheers, applause, and celebrations that spilled into the streets. For many African Americans, Simpson's acquittal represented a rare victory against a justice system that they believed had historically been stacked against them. Finally, a black man with the resources to mount an adequate defense had beaten a system that had failed them for centuries. Conversely, in predominantly white communities, the reaction was one of shock, disbelief, and anger. Many white Americans had followed the evidence presented during the trial and were convinced of Simpson's guilt, beyond any reasonable doubt. To them, the verdict represented a complete failure of the justice system, proof that celebrity status and expensive lawyers could literally allow someone to get away with murder. The O.J. Simpson case had become far more than a criminal trial. It had evolved into a Rorschach test for American society, revealing deep-seated beliefs about race, class, celebrity, and justice that many people didn't even realize they held. The trial had forced America to confront uncomfortable truths about itself, and the verdict had shown just how differently black and white Americans perceived the same evidence, the same legal system, and the same concept of justice. The impact of the Simpson case extended far beyond the courthouse steps. It fundamentally changed American media coverage of high-profile trials, ushering in an era of gavel-to-gavel television coverage and creating a new genre of legal commentary and analysis. The trial made household names of attorneys, judges, and expert witnesses, while establishing a template for how celebrity criminal cases would be covered for decades to come. More significantly, the case exposed and exacerbated racial divisions in American society that many had hoped were healing. The starkly different reactions to the verdict showed that despite decades of civil rights progress, black and white Americans still lived in fundamentally different realities when it came to their relationship with law enforcement and the justice system. The case sparked difficult but necessary conversations about these divisions, conversations that continue to this day. The O.J. Simpson case remains a watershed moment in American history, a single trial that revealed the fault lines in American society and changed how the nation thought about race, celebrity, and justice. Whether Simpson was guilty or innocent has become almost secondary to the larger questions the case raised about American society itself. In many ways, the trial of the century wasn't really about O.J. Simpson at all. It was about America putting itself on trial, and the verdict revealed a nation still struggling to live up to its ideals of equal justice under law. Today, nearly 3 decades later, the O.J. Simpson case continues to fascinate and divide Americans, serving as a reminder of a time when the nation watched together as their heroes fell. Their assumptions were challenged, and their deepest beliefs about justice were tested in the most public way possible. The case changed everything and nothing. The legal system continued to function, celebrities continued to face legal troubles, and America continued to grapple with issues of race and justice. But something had shifted, something fundamental about how Americans understood their society and themselves. The trial of the century had ended, but its impact would be felt for generations to come.